my goal in life is to be a mother of as many children as I can. And I think if I hadn't done those mushrooms at the time, I would not have been so comfortable in who I am now.
Veronica is an ex-vegan who was able to heal from the problems she faced as a vegan with a diet high in raw animal foods. She's the textbook definition of a high-quality woman, and in this interview, we talked about how she healed from veganism, her current diet, raw versus cooked food, the differences between men and women, and much more. I hope you enjoy. Veronica, you were a vegan for a period of time. I don't know how long, but of course you can tell us. What
Mhm.
health problems did you face? And what did you do to heal those problems?
So I went initially vegan, plant-based when I was 16, 17 after watching all those Netflix documentaries about red meat causes cancer, pollution, this, that, like carbon, whatever. And I was young, I was very impressionable. So I remember watching this documentary and thinking, I am never eating meat again. Like, how could I have even been contributing to this? I started following basic vegan pages on the internet. And once again, I was very young and impressionable. They just made me believe that eating meat is completely wrong. We shouldn't be doing it as a human species. If you have morals, if you have empathy, you shouldn't be eating meat. And at first, I was just like classic junk food vegan. Me and my friends would go out to fast food restaurants. I just wouldn't get meat in my food. I just wouldn't get cheese in my food or eggs, whatever, because I genuinely thought that those foods were poisonous. At the very beginning, it was like I was really, really brainwashed. I genuinely thought if something didn't have animal products in it, in a way, it was healthier for me, just on the fact that it didn't have animal products with it in it. And I realized that was very wrong. 2 years, 2-ish years into it, I started becoming more health conscious about the things I'm putting into my body. So I started going for the leaves, the beans, the tofu, whatever, and I cut out all the junk food. And funny enough, that was when I started feeling the worst. My hair was falling out. I was constantly tired. I had the classic vegan eye bags. I would bruise like so easily. If you touched me like on the arm, like if you pushed your finger into my arm, I would have a bruise the next day. And my skin was never really an issue, like acne wise. I always had clear skin. I think part of that is genetics, especially since my parents came from Eastern Europe where they weren't exposed to ultra processed foods as if, my parents, my grandparents, great grandparents, if they lived in North America, they would have been. So I'm very grateful for that fact that I'm kind of like the first generation that was exposed to that stuff. And I'm cutting out exposure to those things as much as I can from an early age. But yeah, so my health problems really started when I started eating all the leaves, the roots, the stems, and I've always had a pretty open mind to things. I remember watching on TikTok, I would start getting, this was like 2 years into the Whole Foods plant-based thing. I would get videos of Paul Saladino talking about how kale is bullshit, spinach is bullshit, like these things don't want, like the classic like defense chemical argument. And I remember feeling so triggered. Like I remember watching these videos. I'm like, who is this random guy telling me that, like leaves or whatever, salad is bad for you? Like it's not bad for you. It's like good for you. And then over time, the videos kept showing up on my For You page more and more. And that's why I think like TikTok is actually a very powerful tool if you want it to be. Like if you're spending time scrolling aimlessly, like it's going to make you feel horrible. But if you're harnessing that energy into a good thing, it's going to help you. So more and more these videos kept coming up on my For You page. So I started actually listening to his podcasts, listening to whatever these like animal-based eaters had to say. And I realized, oh my God, like I feel like shit because I'm eating this way. I'm not eating any animal products. If I'm doing this whole thing for health, like the whole Whole Foods plant-based thing, why do I not feel good? And then from that, So this was the end of 2022, I believe. First, my parents, we went on a ski trip, and I remember on that ski trip, I was just like, okay, I'm just gonna eat a steak, like whatever, we'll see how I feel. I felt fine after it. And then I got back home, I looked for raw milk, completely illegal in Canada. They like good luck finding it. I like thankfully I have a source now, so that's not my worry. Very thankful for that. But yeah, I heard all the crazes about raw milk. I would read articles about how beneficial it is. It's so molecularly similar to human breast milk. I went to the pet store and I bought raw goat's milk and I started drinking that every single day. I wouldn't say that I felt better right away because, like, obviously I had done a lot of damage to myself, but it like certainly felt like I was on the right track. And if you think about, I was 105 pounds. I'm 5'8". Like that's not okay. I was eating like a normal amount of food every day, breakfast, lunch, dinner. I was eating normally, but I just like I could not gain weight, whatever. Fast forward to now, I'm 130 pounds, and in between, it's really difficult to say like what made me feel significantly better, what like did I notice the most. But if I go back a year and I think of what I am now, like animal food saved my life. Like I don't know if we'd be like if I'd even be alive if I hadn't made that switch, because if I look back on pictures now, I was literally deteriorating. So
Would
yeah.
okay. Would you say that animal foods had the highest impact?
Yes, 100%. 100%.
Okay.
And it was like first I started drinking raw milk just because I thought that it was like a quick fix to fix my gut. And then I realized if pasteurized milk, like I never from being vegan to starting eating animal foods, I never drank pasteurized milk. And from reading the argument that, because I had always thought that like dairy was bad for you, right? But then finding out about raw milk, I quickly made the connection that the reason I thought that dairy was bad for you, the reason that like all the studies, all the media is really quick to say dairy is bad for you, is because they heat the shit out of it and they homogenize it, and they like it's destroying all the nutrients out of it. And then from that, I kind of made the quick connection that like, oh my God, the reason that like I know that pasteurized dairy is bad for you and that raw dairy isn't is because it's a whole food. All of its nutrients and enzymes are retained. And from that, I quickly made the connection to raw meat doing essentially the same thing, like raw organs, raw eggs, and yeah.
Who influenced you? So usually we learn about these things from certain people. Who did you stumble upon that taught you about raw animal foods and practically anything that has helped you from a health perspective?
So it's kind of hard to say because I think about stuff a lot. I analyze stuff a lot. It was mostly my own thinking, other than like reading articles about the raw milk. That kind of like it was like a snowball effect into all the other foods. And like obviously I had read about Ogenus's like theories, whatever. I read a portion of We Want to Live. I've skimmed through the recipe for living without disease, and videos here and there come up on TikTok. There's you might know him on Instagram, Raw Meat Experiment.
Yeah, I think
His
so.
Yeah, his posts about eating raw meat in general just like made me realize like, okay, this isn't like some far-fetched idea. It's like real normal people do this and it works and nobody's getting sick from it, really. And so yeah, I'd say the raw milk was really like an like intense snowball effect into things that like I should have been doing years and years ago. And also my parents are Eastern European. So when I was like bringing up these ideas to them, like, yeah, I'm going to drink raw milk. I'm going to put like raw eggs in my smoothies. I'm going to this, that. This is like stuff that they'd been doing when they were younger. Like I remember cracking an egg into my coffee. I don't really drink coffee anymore, But I remember cracking an egg into my coffee, and my mom was like, "Oh, we used to do that when we were younger. Like it has like a Polish name and everything to it." Raw meat, staple in their diet, like completely normal. Like no one bats an eye in Eastern Europe or Europe in general when you eat raw meat. It's just become like a really Western thing to be scared of raw foods because it increases the risk of foodborne illness or whatever, which I just think is like completely like not true.
Was it easy to start eating raw meat? Because I know that many people they struggle with it.
Yeah. So I'm really an all or nothing person. Like if I want to do something, I'm going all in no matter what. So for me, it was not difficult at all because before I started eating raw meat, I started eating raw liver, like just to help with because I had lost my period for a while and stuff. And I think that really helped with getting it back. So obviously, raw liver does not taste good by any means. So um it wasn't hard though. Like it was almost like my when you really want to do something, your brain knows when you want to do something versus when you don't. So if you think it's going to taste disgusting, if you think it's going to be unenjoyable, you're going to believe that. I genuinely wanted to like this stuff. I knew it was good for me. Something in my brain was telling me that it was good for me. So I honestly don't think it was difficult at all. Like I remember I was cooking, this was before I started eating like raw meat weekly on the regular. I was cooking ground beef like on the barbecue, whatever. And I just remember like I formed the little patties into circles. And I just remember taking a bite of the burger like before I put it on the stove. And I was like chewing it. And when I first started eating raw liver, like it made me like gag because of how that doesn't do like happen anymore. Like I feel normal when I eat raw liver now. But I remember taking a bite of the ground beef and like chewing it, and I didn't get that like reflex. And I'm like, oh my God, like why it has virtually no taste. The texture is like normal. Like I like this, I can do this. Like it almost felt natural in a way, as if it's something that I should have been doing for a long time.
So in comparison to most people, now that we're talking about cooked food and raw food, many raw meat eaters, they start eating raw meat and then they only eat raw meat. But
Mm.
you seem to mix both. Do you feel like there are certain benefits to cooked meat that you could miss out on if you don't eat cooked meat? And how's the balance between, cooked food and raw food in relation to health, in your opinion?
I wouldn't say there's anything you're missing out on if you eat cooked food. Like I'd certainly say I feel better when I'm eating raw foods. I feel more alive. My digestion certainly feels better. But for me, it's more of like a social aspect. Like if you think about even like pre-industrialization, people have been eating cooked foods and raw foods. And I think the fact that certain foods need to be cooked is a sign that we shouldn't eat them. Like beans, like you know how you need to sprout beans or sprout oats and then soak them and then yada yada. I feel like this prolonged like preparation process is kind of like a sign that we shouldn't be eating them. Like the fact that you can just kill a deer or take an egg from a chicken and just eat it like right then and there, it's ready for you to eat. Like that's almost like fast food. Like if you think evolutionarily, people didn't think of food as such a comfort thing. It wasn't like food tastes good. It was food is needed to survive. So the fact that you can shoot a deer and just like eat it essentially right away, drink its blood, eat all its organs, and it's not a problem is kind of like a sign that this is what humans are supposed to be eating. For me now, cooked food, the way I think of it is I eat raw foods for nutrition. I eat raw foods to replenish my cells because I know that when I eat cooked foods, it's depleting the high quality vitamin and mineral storage from my cells to make up for the ones lost during the cooking process. But for me, it's more of like a comfort thing. Cooked food for comfort, raw food for nutrition. And especially now where I live, it's normal for everybody my age to eat junk food, to eat fast food. And for me, my version of junk food is cooked food. Like like you know how when people say comfort food, you think of popcorn, chips, candy, this, that. Like, no, my version of comfort food is a nice sear on a steak, some mashed potatoes, and some steamed carrots. And to most people, that's like the healthiest food that they will eat, like all month or all year. But no, I eat raw food for health, essentially. And then the cooked food is what brings me comfort. And it's also like a social thing. Like, I don't go out like in the way that people go out to clubs and whatnot, but when I'm hanging out with my friends, like, I'm not just gonna crack a raw egg into my mouth and call it a day. Like, I still enjoy the social aspect that food brings. I enjoy eating like charcuterie board type foods, like cheese, olives, cooked meat, whatever. It's, yeah.
Speaking of cooked food, what do you think of salt? Is salt healthy?
I wouldn't say salt is necessarily bad for you if you're eating sea salt. Like, most of the salt that is in the grocery store, I would not consume. If it's just salt and all the minerals are removed from it, it's doing absolutely nothing to your body. I like sea salt that contains trace minerals in it, like magnesium, for example, because I believe that our soils nowadays, especially if you're getting your food from monocropped sources, like from the grocery store. If you're growing your own food, this is different. Like, you will be getting more trace minerals from the soil than if you were shopping at the grocery store. But I do believe that most people's like diet when they're eating stuff that comes from the ground is lacking minerals. So I think salt makes up for this in a way, but I also do think that people are addicted to cooked food. And when you eat raw meat, when you eat raw eggs, when you eat raw animal products of any kind, like, there's no need for salt. It tastes good on, obviously, if you get used to it. It tastes good on its own. Try cooking a steak without salt and telling me if it tastes good or not. Obviously, it's going to taste bland, it's going to taste horrible. People are addicted to cooked food, and when you cook food, you need to add salt to it. So in a way, it's like they're working together, the salt and the cooked food, they're working together to make you addicted. Not in a like drug sense, obviously, but you associate the cooked food aspect of it with salt. And I think if you were eating a diet of only raw food, there would be absolutely no need for salt whatsoever. But the fact that me and I know a lot of people do still eat cooked food, you, like, in a way, you do need to add salt to it, because I don't think I could eat a cooked steak without adding salt to it.
Something we have in common is we both sunbathe without sunscreen. So I'd like
Yeah.
to ask you, what health practices do you do outside of nutrition that have helped you, well, with your health and healing from veganism?
Mm, Definitely sunbathing is a huge one. Obviously, I live in the north where it's cold from, November to March, April. So that part of it is difficult. But, when it's you're balancing your circadian rhythm. So going to bed with the sun and then waking up with the sun. So when I wake up, the first thing that I always like to do is, even 10-15 minutes is a huge thing. Just going on a walk outside, trying to see, finding the sun and just looking into it. Obviously, it's not good to look into the sun at peak sunlight because that will literally blind you. But in the morning, when it's filled with infrared light, and same thing at sunset, it's really good for your eyes to detect that, like, okay, the sun is rising or the sun is setting, it's time for me to wake up or it's time for me to go to bed. Grounding is also a huge one, but again, I live in the north, so like, what am I going to do, set my feet into the snow and whatever? But when I go on walks, I'm like very diligent about, okay, let me find a walking stick, because if I'm holding onto the stick and the stick is touching the ground every so often, like, that's grounding me through the stick. Or I'll put my hand onto a tree and just like sit there and stand there. And maybe it is placebo, but it probably is placebo, just because it's like my brain knowing that I'm doing these things that are good for me. But like, I feel different just like staring out into the fields when I'm just standing in my shoes alone than versus if my hand is like on a tree. You know what I mean? And yeah, that's about it. I would say that also not working out necessarily is good for you, because I understand that women shouldn't strength train in the way that men do. It's our hormones are different. Men's bodies kind of like depend upon putting physical stress on their bodies. Like they thrive off of that. Women's bodies are more attuned to emotional stress, and we can deal more and more with that. So I wouldn't say that weight training, running, like all of that, like high interval intensity workout is good for you, but like stretching, making sure you're getting, 10,000 steps a day, just like being diligent about going out into nature and walking. And I do think that moving your body outside in nature in like very natural ways is much more beneficial to you than going into a gym where there's artificial lighting. You're doing these, I wouldn't say fake, but like it's almost like forced movement is like worse for you than going out into nature and like lifting a rock or like moving a tree. Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah, that stick thing has completely blown my mind because I've never thought of it, that you could ground through the stick. I'm going to start doing that.
Oh yeah, yeah, that's literally the only thing I do in the winter time for grounding, because I'm not trying to put my bare feet into the snow. I'm sorry.
But that's the thing you said about exercise is interesting because I was going to ask you about that. So would you say that being in the red zone is unhealthy? You know,
What do you call red
red zone,
zone?
so you're doing high intensity exercise, your heart rate
Hmm.
is very high.
Hmm. I would say that's very different for men than women. For women, I don't think being in the red zone is necessarily good for you, unless you're like, obviously there's a difference between someone who is hormonally imbalanced doing these things than someone who is in tune with their nature. They follow their cycles, whatever. Like I do think that there is space for those sorts of things for women. Like I think women are just as capable as men for doing these things, but it does not mean they should.
Uh,
So our women's cycles, they follow the moon, like the 28 phase, whereas men's cycles follow the sun. And women's cycles also do follow the sun. Like when you wake up, you feel different than when you're going to bed. And that kind of like, for men, testosterone is much higher when they wake up than when they're going to bed. Don't quote me on that. It could be the other way around. I'm just kind of like pulling stuff out the top of my head. But for women, I do think that there is space for this sort of like high intensity training. Like I do think that if you think evolutionarily in a life-threatening situation, like obviously survival of the fittest, if a woman needed to survive in that way, she would have to be able to outrun something. She would have to be able to lift something super heavy when like her life depended on it. But it's not something that you should be getting comfortable with. It's not something that you should be doing day in, day out, because our women's bodies depend on being able to slow down. Like we need to find that like safe space essentially and stay in that. Whereas men's bodies are much more simple in a way. They depend on day in, day out, building up that stress and like reaching a breaking point in a way. Whereas women's bodies much more complicated. Some days they can do it, some days they can't. And like obviously you need to, like, working out is obviously healthy, but as a woman you need to be much more careful and diligent about it, and not reaching your breaking point every single day, but just finding like a safe balance of it essentially.
Something I forgot to ask you about, the vegan period in general is, do you feel like you've healed all the problems you had previously, or do you feel like there's more to go?
Well, obviously, in any situation, there's obviously room to grow, there's room to get better, but for the most part, I look back on the time that I was vegan and like I genuinely do not feel like the same person. I've gained so much wisdom, I've gained weight, I've gained like health. Like I don't feel any of the problems that I had before have followed me into who I am now. Like I will say, like I like hair is a big one because I lost a lot of hair when I was vegan. When I look at who I was before I was vegan, my hair was super thick, my hair was super healthy, shiny, whatever. I know that's one aspect of it that I'm working back to get, because hair is like a very spiritual thing. Like it holds on to memories, it holds on to a lot of stuff. It's a huge indicator. Yeah, that's why you're growing your hair out. Yeah. So when I look at my hair, I'm like, oh, like it used to be nicer than this. So I feel like that's a reflection of what's going on inside my body. But at the same time, I look at my nails, they're super long, super healthy, like they don't break. They used to, I wouldn't, before when I was vegan, I would not have been able to grow my nails out just because of how often they were breaking. They were so flimsy, they were so brittle. So I feel like in most aspects, I have regained my health. Like I don't feel weak anymore. I don't feel tired. I don't like my skin is glowing. But in some aspects, I look at my hair for one, and I'm like, this isn't where I could be if I hadn't done that, for example, or if I keep doing things the way I am now in 3 to 4 years' time, I know I'll be healthier than I am now.
Yeah, a fun thing about nails, actually, when you become healthy, is that whenever you clip them, they're much harder to clip. And when you clip them, it sounds much
Yeah.
louder. Have you
Yeah.
experienced that?
Yeah. Well, I don't cut my nails like at all. I just grow them and then I'll file them. But like even before, I remember I'd be able to like push down and like the whole nail would just like fold. Now it just feels like, rock hard. I do the dishes every single day in my house. Before, doing the dishes would just literally make my nails like melt in a way. Now I don't experience breakage whatsoever. So I feel like that's a huge indicator of like the fact that in my body, I'm not in a survival state anymore. My body is able to use these extra vitamins and minerals to strengthen my nails. And I know nails are like biotin made up of the very like a similar thing as hair. So I know that if my nails are growing in this great way, that like my hair is hopefully going to follow in the same steps.
Yeah, they're both made of keratin. So, no, it should work the same way. But going back to men and women, you see, we grow up in modern society and we get a lot of thoughts in our head. Usually, in this day and age, they like to tell us that men and women are the same thing, but obviously we're not.
No.
So, what are your thoughts on, the roles of men and women in families and society, masculinity and femininity in general? Could you enlighten the people who have been brainwashed by modern society?
So I think masculinity and femininity are two very different roles, but they both complement each other in a way. This is like a very like physical type of example, but I'll notice when I see my partner cleaning, a guy obviously, doing the dishes, cleaning the kitchen, he's not doing as good of a job as I could be. I noticed like he misses stains. He's not like when he's doing the dishes, he's just like not putting his elbow grease into it. I don't know how to explain it. But then in the same way, if I were to go to his labor job where he's lifting rocks all day and like making pavement, he would notice flaws on my end. So I think that masculine energy has its strengths, but it also has its weaknesses, and then feminine energy has its strengths, but it also has its weaknesses, and then that's how they come together and like sort of complement each other in a way. And I think society is especially like through the mainstream media, we're like trying to say, oh, women can be, women have a space in the corporate world, women like have a right to do this, women can do anything that men can do. And I think that is true, women can do anything men can do, but it does not mean that they should. Masculinity, like men as a whole, are meant to be the providers. Like like nature, they're meant to be the protectors of a family, like they're supposed to be strong, they're supposed to protect their women or to protect their family from anything. They're supposed to take care of outside of the home. And like, I'm very interested in the evolutionary aspect of it because this is interesting. If women were you know, in history and like through all of time, except now we're being told that this isn't the way it should be and it's leading to detriment, women stayed home with the children. Men would go out, they would hunt, they would be the protector and provider from outside the home. Women would be the protector and provider for inside the home. If the man was by himself, he would be focused on, you know, hunting, fighting off any threats, whatever. He would have nothing safe to come back to. If the woman was only focused on the inside of the home, providing for children, you know, nurturing, taking on that caring role, she would have nothing to, how do I word this? Like, there would be no external force that would protect her from the outside world. So I think it's like, it really is beautiful. Like, it shouldn't be like sexist or like whatever to say these things. I think it's beautiful that a guy can protect the external world of a woman and a woman can protect the internal world of a man. And I think it's like, it's a dual relationship in a way that you can't destroy that, because then society crumbles.
Would you say that in the future you would prefer to be more of a housewife?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. I think a lot of people needed to hear that. That's why I asked. Well, a question I like to ask is, you probably have thoughts about, you know, life and existence that have been helpful to you. You know, I've stumbled upon people who have told me things that are very helpful to me. So you probably also have thoughts about, yeah, life and existence that are very helpful to you. Um, does anything come to mind?
Yeah, a few things do. When I was 18, I took 9 grams of mushrooms, and like that's a lot, right? For an 18-year-old like skinny girl, that is like, wow. But I don't know. You know, when you think back on like life-changing points in your life and you're like, in the moment you don't understand why it's happening, but as you grow from it, it kind of clicks into your mind almost that like, I know exactly why that happened. During that time when I took those 9 grams, it was like a switch flipped in my brain. Like, something just told, because me and my friend had bought in 12 grams. She took 3, I took the rest of the 9. In that moment, it was like something like a flip switched in my brain, and it was like, eat the rest of those mushrooms. Like, you need to do this. I don't like, it wasn't, something took over me and told me to eat all of those mushrooms. And obviously it was like a experience and a half. Like, I'm still recovering from that in so many ways. But I do think that the way that my life has played out now, if I hadn't done that, I would not have had as open of a mind to all of the things that I think now, and I would not have been able to like go into my feminine energy as much and like accept my position and my role as a woman. I would have been much more hesitant to do that. You know, I would have been more inclined to want to be a part of the corporate world, like want to, like, my goal in life is to be a mother of as many children as I can. And if I think if I hadn't done those mushrooms at the time, I would not have been so comfortable in who I am now and how I view the world. So that was a huge accelerator in that. It helped me open my mind to like be more comfortable in myself as a woman, be more comfortable in, you know, I don't agree with a lot of society's like rules and where things are headed. I think we're going backwards in so many ways. And yeah, it's really helped me embrace the traditional roles in a sense. Yeah.
A term I've seen you use, now that you mentioned feminine energy, is feminine energy maxing. Now, if I want to max masculine energy, I go out and I chop down a tree, or I just
Mhm.
hit something. But I
Yeah.
don't know anything about feminine energy, Maxine, so if you could please enlighten us.
I would say that it's more like, I don't want to come off as like sexist because like I understand me saying these things comes off as that, but it's almost just like knowing your place, where to stay in it, because obviously if I was in a relationship with a like very masculine guy, he would know his place. I would know my place. If we're both secure in who we are as a person, like there's no need to feel that I'm like diminishing myself to be with this man. I don't know if you understand what I'm saying or not, but it's almost like knowing your place and how to stay in it, like learning how to slow down is a huge one because like you said, if you want to be masculine, you go outside and chop a tree, you do things, you build things. Men thrive on that. Women thrive on, slowing down, nurturing. I think having kids is a huge one. If like the motherly instinct is like a really really big one. Like when you have kids, like you kind of like have a desire to nurture anything in sight, like create things. Men like to build things from like a very physical sense, cutting down a tree, and then from cutting down the tree you have wood. With the wood you can build, like a box or a house. Like, yeah, good for you. Women like to create things in a more mental sense, in a more emotional sense, like, painting, poetry, whatever. And not to say that these things aren't like men can do those things, but I don't think I'm wording this in the right way, but it's very like in a much more emotional sense and a mental sense than a physical sense, that you need to almost like look inwards, whereas men can be the ones to look outwards.
I think the important distinction there is that for men to feel masculine, we need to do stuff. Well, the way
Mhm.
you're wording it is that for women to feel feminine, they need to be.
Yeah.
It's less about action, it's more about knowing where you should be.
Yeah.
That's
And
my
like I think the beautiful part of that is that men just feel comfortable and happy. You give them a hammer, you give them an axe, like give them a fishing rod, they go out into the world, they're set. Women, it's much more complicated in a way, because what you just said, how I worded it, like I do agree with that. It's much more complicated though, because if you tell a woman just to be, she's going to start thinking, overthinking, like, all of these thoughts pop into her head. And I think it's much more like not difficult, but it's like a different, like it's much more simple to be a man. I think you can agree with that, than it is to be a woman, because if he feels contentment from, going out fishing, going out cutting down a tree, and then a woman, you're like, all right, stay at home, but just be yourself, just read, just this, all of these thoughts are going to pop into her head. And I think to be feminine is to acknowledge those thoughts, let them come, let them go, but like don't attach yourself to any one of those thoughts, because the whole point of being feminine is to acknowledge all of these things, but don't let them in a way define you. Obviously they will define you because that's who you are, but don't attach yourself to any one of these things. Like, don't overthink it. Obviously easier said than done, but yeah.
Yeah, I'd say that the thought is also an action. So if you
Mm-hmm.
if you remove the thoughts too, then maybe we're at a place where it would be more accurate to say just be. You
Yeah.
understand what I mean? Now this question, if you've done research into it, then like I'm happy to hear your thoughts about it. But outside of Christmas Island and the North Pole, what countries do you think are the most optimal to live in the modern world?
I think, okay, so North America, I really appreciate the idea of having access to big city resources, like, for example, the hospital, just like being able to go to a grocery store and like anything you can think of is there. I'm not completely anti-modern medicine. Like I do think that there, like in a life-threatening emergency, there's a time and a space for it for sure. So just being able to have access to that sort of thing when you absolutely need it, like I'd say North America is like a great start, but then also having like a second home, somewhere that you can escape, either, Mexico, Costa Rica, somewhere where it's warm all year round, or like somewhere in Europe. For example, I wouldn't I wouldn't want to live in one place all year round. I'd want to have multiple areas where I can go to depending on the seasons, depending on how I feel, whatever. Like I think it's important to have that sort of freedom. And, tying yourself down to one location, in especially maybe 300 years ago, that would have been like the ideal, but because, planes didn't exist, whatever, but because of the way the world is going now, like everything is so unpredictable, I think it would be important to have, locations in multiple areas. But then again, I'm not so anti-modern anything that I think it's a good idea to go escape into the woods and never talk to anybody in society again. I think it is important to place yourself in an area where you do have access to big city resources like the hospital or like the big chain grocery stores.
Okay,
Just
so
out of
no, continue.
Yeah. No, I was just gonna say, just out of like survival, like whatever. If you're in the middle of nowhere and something happens, what are you gonna do? Especially if the entire world depends on this stuff anymore. Like it's not like a free for all anymore where there's just tribe here, tribe there, a little family living here. Like it's like the whole entire world depends on these kinds of things. Like that's, whether you like it or not, that's the way we're headed. And so I think it's important to coordinate yourself in that way.
So the basic gist of it is have a place, have a farm, and then have access to modern society.
Yeah.
All right. Well, with that said, I mean, I don't have any more questions. I think you've done a beautiful job answering all of these questions, and I'm sure the person listening has gained a lot. Seriously, I think they've gained a lot. So with that said, thank you.
Thank you. I really enjoyed this. Thank you for being the first person to want to interview me.